Before dawn, on the 3rd of January 2026, Caracas did not wake up to explosions echoing across the city. There was no blackout, no collapsing skyline, no shock and awe. Instead, something far more unsettling happened. In a matter of hours, more than 200 U.S. Special Operations Forces moved through the heart of Venezuela's capital, penetrated its defenses, and walked out with Nicolas Maduro and his wife alive. No U.S. troops were killed. The country's military infrastructure was not destroyed. The state, remarkably, was left standing. This was not a war meant to be seen. It was a message meant to be understood. Satellite images later told the story. A strike so narrow, so deliberate, that it resembled law enforcement more than invasion. Power grids were untouched. Command headquarters still stood. Even most air defenses survived. If this surprises you, pause for a moment, because what happened here signals a profound shift in how power is used in the 21st century. If you want to understand where global power is going, stay with me. And to see why this operation mattered far beyond Venezuela, we need to step back and define the real question at stake. At first glance, it is tempting to describe what happened in Venezuela as a military success story, a clean operation, precise intelligence, a dictator removed with minimal force, but that framing misses the point. The real question is not how the United States captured Nicolas Maduro. It is why it chose not to destroy the system around him. Historically, American power has often been expressed through scale, overwhelming force, paralyzed infrastructure, shattered command centers. Iraq in 1991, Iraq again in 2003. The objective was collapse followed by control. Venezuela was different. Here, the United States deliberately avoided striking regular military headquarters, naval assets, runways, power stations, or communications networks that would have crippled the state. Instead, it targeted only what stood in the way of one narrow goal: extracting a single man and his inner circle. This was force with boundaries, violence with restraint, power signaling, not power domination. And that choice raises a deeper issue, one that sits beneath the satellite images and damage assessments. To understand it, we have to look at how Venezuela's system reached a point where such an operation was even possible. Long before the helicopters crossed Venezuelan airspace, the outcome of January 3 was already being shaped. It was shaped by years of erosion inside the National Bolivarian Armed Forces, training that grew lax, air defenses left exposed, units operating in the open, not because they were confident, but because that was how they had always trained. Militaries, as analysts often note, fight the way they rehearse. And Venezuela rehearsed complacency. Layered on top of this was something more corrosive: corruption, cronyism, and collapsing morale. Command structures existed on paper, but when electronic warfare and disruption struck, they failed to react in time. Surprise was not created by brilliance alone. It was enabled by decay. The United States did not need to dismantle Venezuela's defenses wholesale. Doctrine does not require that. Corridors are enough. A narrow path, carefully cleared, is far more efficient than total destruction. And so the stage was set not for a war, but for a moment of rupture. Because when a system grows hollow, it does not collapse all at once. It cracks at a single critical point. That crack would open first at one place above all others. The first visible rupture came at Fort Tiuna. This was not just another military base. It was the nerve center of Venezuela's armed forces, and critically, where Maduro and his wife were believed to be sheltering as pressure mounted. When the strikes began, they did not sweep across the complex. They did not hit barracks, parade grounds, or administrative buildings. Instead, damage clustered tightly around a few specific nodes: a mechanized units vehicle facility, emergency power infrastructure, and an entrance to an underground facility linked to Maduro's bunker network. This was a crisis measured in meters, not miles. U.S. planners understood the risk. Special operations forces are elite, but they are light infantry. A single mechanized counterattack, heavy armor, rapid movement could have overwhelmed them. So that threat was neutralized first. Quietly, precisely, satellite imagery later revealed a large crater at what may have been the bunker entrance itself. Whether caused by munitions or by operators forcing entry, the signal was unmistakable. The last line of protection had failed. If you're watching closely, this is where the operation truly turns. Because once Fort Tiuna was cracked, the rest was no longer a question of firepower but of timing. And that narrow window would define everything that followed. If this analysis is helping you see the operation differently, stay with me. What Fort Tiuna revealed was not just a vulnerability, but a design. This operation worked because it followed a simple, often misunderstood principle of modern warfare. You do not need to destroy a system to control it. You only need to paralyze the parts that matter for long enough at the exact moment you choose. Air defenses were not eliminated wholesale. They were thinned just enough to open corridors. Radars were struck selectively, not erased from the map. Communications were degraded, not annihilated. The objective was silence, not collapse. This explains why so many Venezuelan military assets remained untouched. Navy ships sat intact. Headquarters buildings stood. Runways were damaged just enough to deny fixed-wing aircraft, while helicopters could still land. Every choice signaled restraint and intent. The deeper logic was political. By sparing the broader military structure, the United States preserved something essential, an institution capable of maintaining order after Maduro was gone. Decapitation without disintegration. In other words, violence was used not to end the game, but to reset it. And yet, systems under pressure rarely respond as planners expect. Even the most precise operation creates ripples, human, institutional, and strategic. Those ripples would soon surface beyond Fort Tiuna, in places that were never meant to be at the center of attention. And that is where the second fracture begins. The second fracture unfolded away from the bunkers, in places designed to look ordinary. At La Carlota Air Base, the strikes avoided buildings, hangars, and runways. Impact points appeared in open areas where an exposed surface-to-air missile system had been sitting in plain sight. Aircraft were later parked on the runway not to destroy the base, but to deny its use by larger planes. Helicopters, notably, could still land. At La Guaira port, a single pier absorbed the blast. 2 warehouses damaged. The strike point fell precisely where an air defense unit had been positioned. Nearby naval vessels, only hundreds of meters away, were left untouched. And at Higuerote Airport, far from the main ground action, a truck was destroyed near the terminal. Secondary damage followed, but the pattern remained the same. Narrow, deliberate, restrained. The likely target again was air defense, poorly camouflaged, anticipating danger yet unprepared for it. These sites shared one function: clearing and protecting corridors. Not for conquest, but for movement, entry, and exit without resistance. Still, precision did not mean absence of cost. About 75 people were killed. 2 civilians died. Residential buildings were damaged. In one case, an anti-radiation missile detonated near an apartment block. Another civilian was killed near a communications array. This was control without chaos, but not without consequence. And those consequences would soon shift from the battlefield to the lives of ordinary people. For most Venezuelans, January 3 was not experienced through satellite images or strategic briefings. It was felt through fear. If you were living in Caracas that night, you did not see a regime collapse. You heard distant blasts. You felt buildings shake. You woke up unsure of what had changed and what had not. 2 civilians were killed. That number sounds small in military terms, but for the families involved, it was absolute. Homes were damaged. Neighborhoods were pulled briefly into a conflict they never chose. And then came the deeper uncertainty. Maduro was gone, but the system remained. Soldiers were still on the streets. The economy did not magically restart. Sanctions did not evaporate overnight. For ordinary people, precision strikes do not translate into precision outcomes. This is the paradox of restrained power. It minimizes destruction, yet prolongs ambiguity. If you are a citizen living through this moment, the question is simple and brutal. Does this finally lead to change, or just another pause before disappointment? This is why what happens next matters more than what already happened. If you care about how power decisions ripple down to real lives, stay with me, because the consequences of this operation did not stop at Venezuela's borders. What unfolded in Caracas sent a signal far beyond Venezuela. To Havana, Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran, the message was unmistakable. Influence can be severed without invasion. The United States demonstrated it could reach into a capital, remove a leader, and leave the state intact, an approach that complicates every playbook built around proxy power and regime shielding. For regional actors, this was equally destabilizing. Latin American governments watched closely, aware that traditional assumptions about sovereignty, escalation, and deterrence had quietly shifted. This was not intervention by occupation. It was intervention by incision. At the same time, Washington placed itself at a crossroads. Its credibility surged overnight, its leverage peaked. But leverage is perishable. Used too aggressively, it invites resistance. Used too timidly, it evaporates. Inside the United States, the reaction was mixed. While the operation showcased extraordinary capability, political support for further military action was already fracturing. A war powers vote moved forward in the Senate, signaling that even precision carries political cost. Globally, this operation reframed power not as dominance, but as access, the ability to act decisively, then step back. And that reframing leads directly to the hardest question of all. What happens next when force has done its job and only choices remain? What comes after a moment like this is never linear. It branches. From the evidence we have, 3 futures now sit in front of Venezuela, and none of them are clean. The first is the optimistic path. U.S. leverage holds. Interim leadership makes tangible, irreversible commitments. External ties to malign actors are reduced. Oil production resumes under clear legal guarantees. The economy slowly reopens. Elections follow. This is stabilization by discipline, not triumph. Rare, but possible. The second is the muddled middle. Cooperation is partial. Reforms are promised, then delayed. Power brokers hedge. The old system adapts just enough to survive under new names. Violence stays low, but progress stalls. This is the most common outcome in modern interventions and the most deceptive. The third is the dark turn. Resistance hardens, commitments collapse, coercion resumes. Follow-on strikes or new capture operations are used to force compliance. Political opposition inside the United States grows louder. Venezuela becomes a test, not just of power, but of patience. None of these paths depend on military brilliance anymore. They depend on governance, guarantees, and restraint. Because the truth is this: capturing a dictator is the easy part. What determines history is what replaces him. And that brings us to the final insight of this operation and why it should change how you see power itself. There is a temptation after an operation like this to declare victory. A dictator captured, a mission executed flawlessly, a display of unmatched capability. But that temptation is precisely the danger. Operation Absolute Resolve did not prove that power is strongest when it is unleashed. It proves something more unsettling, that power today is most effective when it is withheld, calibrated, and aimed at systems rather than symbols. The United States showed it could reach the center of a hostile regime without breaking the country around it. That is an extraordinary achievement, but it is also a responsibility because restraint creates expectations. And expectations, once raised, must be met. For Venezuela, the easy part is over. For the United States, the hardest part has begun. If leverage is wasted, this moment will close. If it is abused, it will backfire. If it is used wisely, it may actually change a nation's trajectory. This is the new face of power in the 21st century. Quiet, precise, temporary. If this analysis changed how you see global power, share it and stay with me, because the next chapter is never written on the battlefield.